Hatred has no place in my heart. Hatred has no place in my heart. Hatred has no place. Hatred has no place. Hatred has no place in my heart. Hatred has no place in my home. Hatred has no place in my home. Hatred has no place. Hatred has no place. Hatred has no place in my home. Hatred has no place in my town. Hatred has no place in my town. Hatred has no place. Hatred has no place. Hatred has no place in my town. Hatred has no place in this world. Hatred has no place in this world. Hatred has no place. Hatred has no place. Hatred has no place in this world.
Good morning. Thank you, Severin, for that wonderful choir piece. That's quite amazing. Welcome to Pacific Unitarian Church, a magnet for liberal religious thought, a beacon of love and logic, an elegant pile of stone, metal, and glass you'll find nowhere else. My name is Gary Hart, and I'm assisting today. We are a welcoming community to people of any gender, orientation, any race, any creed. If you have had a chance to meet or hear our minister, I know that you will trust me when I say that we pretty much welcome anybody.
I'm right here, Gary.
Sorry. So more on announcements. Thursday, April 1st, the men's group meets here at church at 9:30. All you men, show up. It's great. Saturday, the French conversation meets too, in case you want to brush up on your parlez-vous. Each week, we also offer a couple of adult ed programs. Usually there is a meditation group offered, and we are connected to a yoga teacher.
Gary's point being, if you want a shot at enlightenment, this isn't a bad place to come. This right here is my rough symbol for our pledge drive. You know, you see thermostats a lot. I think we're actually a little bit higher than that. We're at 211 at the moment on the way to 230. We've closed the pledge drive, but not really. And the bigger issue is that we've had people who said that they would pledge, so we've sort of knocked them off the worry list, but we still don't have a number for you. So if you could get that number in, call it into the office, or even better, fill out a pledge form or email myself or Gary or Gabby, and we can tidy this up and stop talking about the pledge drive. Let's see. We don't have a firm number. There we go. Enough about that.
Enough about that. Okay, today Steve promises you'll learn a lot about something you never asked to know anything about. Tell them about Zoroastrianism, Steve.
I will, Gary, after you read our chalice words, and I like the chalice.
All right, chalice words. The illumination of a candle is a sign of human mastery, a reflection of our power to create, to control, and to destroy. May this be a flame of humility, that we may be aware of our recklessness. May it be a flame of compassion, encouraging us to bring light into darkness and to spread warmth where cold prevails. And may it be a flame of connection, that we may recognize the great human family of which we are part.
And may it be a flame that eventually gets lit. Today's Sunday theme, as you have been prompted, is on Zoroastrianism. And the answer to that quiet question brewing in your mind is, I don't know. There is no particular real reason to deliver a sermon on Zoroastrianism. They just had one of their high holidays, so I put it here, and it was to close the pledge drive. I'd like to stop for just a minute and say that there's very little acknowledging Passover today, so I apologize for that. I think we have in our mind that we're going to do a big Seder next year. We've talked about it in most years, and this year obviously wasn't because of a pandemic, the year to start that tradition, but that feels like a tradition. So I'd like to wish everyone a happy Passover, and it's also in the Christian world the start of Holy Week. So these are the two major religions of the East. Part of the reason this sort of Zoroastrian fits in here is because it is a prior religion to both of those in a way. It's sort of simultaneous to Judaism for most of its time. We all have sort of emotional struggles, as we know, and politically the soul of our country is being fought over, and we could all use a little bit more joy and peace and health. I know you're concerned about the IRA, or you're concerned about the NRA, or perhaps your cholesterol. But it's an experiment in wisdom and diversity to pull in as many traditions as we can. I was curious and confident to sort of uncover Zoroastrianism, particularly since Mal and Linda Verghese. Mal grew up, who's recently passed away this year, Zoroastrian, and I sort of got tweaked by that. So you're going to find out, I think, as the sermon proceeds, that this is sort of the closest thing the world has ever had to religion that the Star Trek Enterprise might have encountered, or a religion, a planet Luke Skywalker might have crashed into. It almost feels made up. It almost feels like a mashup of so many other religions. And so I have a little quiz before we start. You can think about these questions as we proceed through. Here we go. I probably would have failed it had I not written it. Here we go. These are all true or false questions. Zoroastrians hold ritual bonfires where people cover their faces so as not to violate the sacred fire with their breath. True or false? The author of the original books of from the 1800s that brought to life the fictitious masked Spanish swordsman Zorro were based on the famous Zoroastrian martyr, and that his name and the famous Z comes from the Zoroastrian tradition. True or false? Zoroastrianism is frequently given credit for inventing the cosmic distinction between light and dark, good and evil that was picked up by Christianity and Islam. True or false? The three wise ones, or magi from the east that travel to Bethlehem bringing gifts for the baby Jesus, were thought to have been Zoroastrianisms. True or false? And the burial rites of Zoroastrians historically involved the building of a small wooden platform sort of off the ground where the body can silently both decay and be eaten by birds. True or false? All are true except the Spanish swords one piece. So there we are. And we have announcements, and now we have a hymn from our beloved Severin.
Let's sing together number 210, which is Wade in the Water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See the band all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. The leader looks like the Israelite. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See the band all dressed in red. God's gonna trouble the water. Looks like the band that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
I'm going to invite Leanne to come forward and light our candle of joy and concern while I share just a few thoughts. One, we continue to think about the Asian American community, and we think about the extension of all oppressions of people. And this church stands as strongly as it stands for anything, that it stands that humans have the potential to undo that wrong and to move into a beloved community where we're all accepted. That's the first. The second is for, we had lost some pets. Some dear people out there have lost pets. 3 or 4 folks have lost pets. I'm not going to name them all. We did that last week, and we're thoughtful about that. Lori Geitman is also recovering from, some kidney issues and on dialysis, and we sort of extend our hearts out to her and extend, as we always do, our hearts out to a troubled and blessed world. The weather here in California is gorgeous. Spring feels like it's arrived. The pandemic is diminishing in its proportions, and there seems to be a breath of fresh air. Let's honor that. If you probably can't hear it off microphone, but there's birds chirping around, as there often are here, but maybe a little more than usual. And with that thought, I turn to Leanne for a prayer from Starhawk.
Good morning. Starhawk wrote this book called Dreaming the Dark, and here are some words from it. We are all longing to go home to some place we have never been, a place half remembered and half envisioned. We can only glimpse from time to time. Somewhere there are people to whom we can speak with passion without having the words catch in our throat. Somewhere a circle of hands will open to receive us. Eyes will light up as we enter. Voices will celebrate with us whenever we come into our own power. Community. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the words and the work that needs to be done. Arms to hold us when we falter, a circle of healing, a circle of friends, someplace where we can be free.
We've foregone reading and also a children's moment this day because the sermon just turned out to be particularly long. I don't normally like to do that. This is sort of a quippy phrase that lives in my head about Zoroastrianism, and it is this. It's an informative talk about a dying religion nobody cared to ask about. And with that long-winded introduction sort of cutting in, it's a name of religion you've probably heard of, sort of swims around the world a little bit in terms of names. It's probably one of the coolest names for a religion. I mean, I just want to become a Zoroastrian just because it's awesome. If you pull away Zen for its simplicity, Zoroastrianism is the best name. And it's known really for its longevity. It's one of its chief claims to fame. It's probably its chief claim to fame. It's also famously a form of monotheism. It's not a pure form of monotheism, but it is a very early form of it. And we think about Zoroastrianism at this time because it sort of sets the table for the Jewish traditions and the Christian traditions. It creates the soil, and it also it's here. If you're a religion geek like I am, Zoroastrianism is the bridge between Eastern religions like Hinduism, and it is the bridge between the Western traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It arguably is the first successful monotheistic faith. There's some dispute about when Zoroaster was born, big disputes, hundreds of years of disputes, and when Zoroastrianism actually takes root. It's funny, it's clumsy, but at least Zoroastrianism is in the running from the monotheism that sets the stage for Judaism and Christianity, and really essentially this week, the Holy Weeks. It predates Christianity and Islam at least, depending on how you date it, by 600 or 1200 years respectively, and its relationship with the Jewish faith is much closer to it being peers than anything else. Whether it's the first monotheism or not, it has a very near universal belief in only one God, and that's a mouthful. Regardless of whether it was the first successful monotheism or not, it played a big part of what the Middle East sort of soil of religion is. Although it might be accurate to think of Zoroastrianism as at best now the fourth wheel, it probably wouldn't even be that to its three neighboring monotheistic faiths. It wasn't always assigned to this role. It was once like Judaism, the older mix and rival guide to that before Christianity and Islam came along. Zoroastrianism was the kind of kid a few blocks away that you watched for clues as to how to do things. We all had role models, and religions do too. And Zoroastrianism is arguably one of the religions that set the stage for the present round of world religions. Here's an image. I like to imagine Abraham and Moses and Zoroaster cruising in the front seat of a big convertible, Jesus and Muhammad resigned to the back seats, no one aware that these two younger figures would eventually be the drivers of religion in the future. The man behind Zoroastrianism was not surprisingly, a guy named Zoroaster. And if you're speaking Persian, Zarathustra. He was born somewhere in what is today the northeast area of Iran and where that meets Afghanistan. And he's also, his precise date of when he was born is highly questionable. It's funny. And when he died, the same way. His ideas and faith, when they begin, is sort of uncertain in a huge, clumsy way. What we have to go about him is a lot of false assumptions. Anyone set back in time is this way, and myths and all the later scholarship that follows that up. So here's two things to consider. For most of history, the prophet's birth was naturally assumed to be near the time that he initiated in BC, the 6th century BCE. However, scholars suggest that there's enough evidence now to suggest that Zoroaster was born even 500 years earlier than that, sometime prior to the year 1000. Not everybody is in agreement on this. So although Zoroastrianism is best known as the primary religion of the Persian Empire, so between 600 BC and 600 CE, that 1200-year span, it sort of was the chief religion of Iran, right? Precedes Islam. And it went sort of that Zoroaster was killed, probably most likely, and then the story of him blossomed, and the history between his actual birth and life and the original flourishing of Zoroastrianism was so lost to history that it came back and was thought to start anew. That's clumsied even more by the Avesta, which is the Zoroastrian Bible, contains no historical references in the way that the Bible does to events that you can cross-reference to time. So it's harder to date things. It's basically much of the early history of that religion was destroyed sort of as Alexander the Great went east. In the simplest of terms, Zoroastrianism started just before the real grasp of human history began, and then appeared again after we got a grip on what history mostly was. When the bio of this enigmatic figure, whose birthday is a mystery, is dared to be written, some very specific stories emerge. Not surprisingly, it's myth. We hear that Zarathustra was the third of 5 brothers born to a low-ranking nobleman, and that he became a priest of one of the old regional traditions from where he grew up. And that he sort of had conversations with God, a new God, that not surprisingly, as we are talking about him today, changed the world. So his God was a God named Ahura Mazda, meaning wise Lord. And the name Zoroaster's new Lord was, I know it sounds like a mid-range, mid-priced sedan, but his name was a combination of wise and Lord. And he thinks of that God as being the force behind all things. He was uncreated but benevolent, and both cares about us and judges what we do. If this description of God sounds vaguely familiar, that's not coincidental. According to Zoroastrianism lore, the spirit messenger Ahura Mazda sent this comically named spirit of good thought, and he was the messenger for which Zoroaster got his message. And he was ordered to teach that there was only one God, very Muhammad-like, right? To oppose the bloody animal sacrifices common at the time, and to create a more peaceful, unified world. This was a time in history when we were moving from tribalism and sacrifices as our main religious act to broader, more cosmopolitan moves. Because it sits on the edge of the Eastern world, right? Afghanistan is sort of the Middle East, which gravitates towards the West, and then also India, which gravitates towards the East. It has this sort of primitive quality of both of them. Either revealed to Zoroaster or conceived by him, that's a big religious question, is the news that the god Ahura Mazda has an animated, powerful spirit called Spenta Manu, who, acting on his behalf, created the world. As humans and all good things in it are part of that creation. If you want to translate that into Judeo-Christian terms that you might be comfortable with, Spenta Manu is sort of the Holy Spirit of Zoroastrianism. And the creation story rests with 6 other benevolent spirits called Amesha Spentas, or holy immortals, that helped create the world. On Zoroaster's Facebook site, should there be one, under relationship with status, it would say monotheistic, but it's complicated. There are other forces at bay that there aren't in more modern versions of monotheism. One of the reasons monotheism is so rare, if not impossible, is that God has so many jobs to do, it's hard not to have helpers or layers there to separate that. In general, being a monotheistic tradition presents a sort of intellectual compromise, right? You're often the creator of the entire universe, and yet you have to also be the source that performs those charitable acts and miracles that take place right here on earth, like helping us get cured by cancer. It's always a challenge that monotheism faces. However, the order created by the sort of odd-layered 7 forces of creation that exists in there is an evil and an imperfection. You have to have some reason for things going wrong. Zoroaster has this vision of there being a Agramanu. Agramanu, think about angry. Agramanu is a devilish sort of character, and he has an off-spun version of a person that would remind us of Satan. So there is sort of an evil force. It's not quite equal to Agramanyu. If one can argue that Zoroaster invented the first monotheism, and certainly one can, an even stronger argument can be made that the faith he started created the battleground for good and evil that we sort of inherit from the monotheistic world, right? That dualism to good and evil was more or less created by Zoroaster at the start. This Agra Mazda, this holy panorama of creation, takes into account the Hindu gods and other gods at the time, and sort of separates them out into good and evil forces. Zoroaster clearly wants to create a world where you're playing on the good side or the bad side. Asha, I know this is very confusing. Asha is the backdrop for everything in creation. You might think of it as the interdependent web upon which all things live, the fabric of creation that things rest upon. And in Zoroastrianism is this image called the Fahavra, which is the depiction of, it's sort of the home base of your soul. It has an iconic image. It's sort of a set of wings with a man standing inside of it. And that is essentially sort of the image that you'd have of your soul. And your soul, isn't this very Judeo-Christian, right? I mean, think about this. This all precedes that. It is, you have this sort of permanent sense of soul that when it dies, it goes off and it goes and sort of, it recharges itself like it would recharge yourself like a cell phone before it reincarnates again. And we are sort of all kind of temporary states. And we are a temporary state called an Irvan. In Zoroastrian, between incarnations, we return to Favrashi and we report in and reboot for another round. So there's a reincarnation feel here too. Amazing. In Zoroastrianism, the dark side has character, identity, and symbols too. It wouldn't be a fair fight if they didn't, right? And this Angramanyu exists that is sustained by a thing called Akamana, which is sort of evil thought. So this satanic character has behind it this sort of notion of corruptness, or I would think of it as being kind of sin. In Zoroastrianism, this dark side has a little bit less personality and a face than it does in sort of Christianity with Satan, but nonetheless, it exists. When one becomes a master of Asha, you can think of yourself as being kind of like a bodhisattva, and the path to spiritual success marches on. The more I explored Zoroastrianism, the more I realized that what I was really doing was just driving an essentially unknown religion. You have to sort of incorporate the things that we know about religion, or that I know about religion, to reconstruct it, right? That's its own thing to think about. It's just said that metaphors and images from other faiths best convey its own ideas, right? Said another way, how one might best understand a relatively unknown religion is naturally by comparing it to the faiths that they have some comprehension of. Let's roll with that a little bit. So like Buddhism, Confucianism, and Christianity, Zoroastrianism is named for a prophet whose very name initiated the movement. This is not shocking. Like many religions, most memorably for us, Jesus, Zoroaster is a hero who has a birth and a death shrouded in mystery. As mentioned, the manner in which Zarathustra, the Persian version of his name, reforms his polytheistic pagan culture and encounters God is best described as the way that Abraham and Muhammad transform their particular cultures. Ritualistically, it has a birth ritual called the Towers of Silence, a burial ritual, I should say, whereas the dead are placed high on platforms, part of our quiz, to just decompose. And this is sort of similar in a way that the sacred bonfires of Hinduism, and I'm sure that they drew from one another in their roots. I could go on, and I will. Like every pagan tradition, like Taoism, and in the manner in which the Greeks chose to explain the world with the four core elements, earth, fire, water, and air, Zoroastrianism utilizes natural elements like water and fire in particular in its worship rites as a means to express the nature of God. What else are we going to do in simplistic times? The insight of opinion that God or Ahura Mazda is the good side in the battle of wills for our souls is very manichaeistic and also very sort of Gnostic in a sense. Like nearly every faith, Zoroastrianism has nearly different levels of how sacred a text is. The most important texts of the religion, not unlike that of the Pentateuch or the Torah, are those called the Avesta, which includes writings attributed to Zoroaster himself, and those are also known as the Gathas. The collections of writings that make up the Avesta, like so much from antiquity, have been edited, broken up, recombined, and lost. The easiest parallel for us are the ways in which the Bible stories and Psalms are reinterpreted and re-edited in all the ways that we get them. Zoroastrianism has secondary layers of authority, just like the Talmud does, or later scriptures in Christian world. Nearly every faith has prayers and phrases that are believed to be special, sort of sacred, perhaps even by a written means that are themselves ways to connect to the holy. Zoroastrianism has mantras, detailed holy phrases that are some of the tools that are given to aid the good, the light, the force. These mantras, formulaic prayers, are believed to have immense power, not unlike some of the Buddhist mantras that are believed to have sort of sacred attachments to other realms or to the deep truth. Like the efforts of the better-known faiths of the Middle East, devout Zoroastrians are known to cover their heads during prayer. Just think about the parallels. In many ways, also including even covering their hands. It's mild, it's a liberating act of individuality, particularly for Zoroastrianism, when you think about this in the Islamic cultures that exist today. Like almost every faith on earth, fire, as I said, water, are symbolically and ritually important. They're both core elements of life, and they're seen as purifiers and seen as sources of wisdom, very much in the way that we see them today. Let's see. Part of Zoroastrianism's connection to fire is its connection to light. In Zoroastrianism, worship, almost all prayers are done in the presence of some fire. So we have all of that going on. It'll be very well faced where it might be conceivably among the last generations of Zoroastrians. They're aware of this. They've done themselves no favors in stopping their declining numbers, not necessarily because they're not successful. They're generally a very successful group of people by modern materialistic standards. There are present about 15,000 Zoroastrians in America, LA being a hotspot for them, interestingly enough, and another 10,000 in Canada. Oddly enough, a sprinkling of new Zoroastrians are ethnically converted Kurds who have migrated to Sweden. So there are maybe around the world, there are little more than 100 to 150,000 total Zoroastrians left in the world. Persia or Iran and the sort of northwest side of India are where they're mostly located. There's reasons for this. They've been a very accepting, sort of tolerant religion. They, like us, have known persecution, and they've almost always sort of been, in the last 1,000 years, outsiders to a more dominant faith. They tend to be particularly tolerant. They tend to be particularly cooperative. And their teaching is not very restrictive about who gets rewarded and how good and ill are distributed. They were forced and encouraged and sought in their self-interest to be a soft people. Even after the rise of Islam, because of its longevity in the region, we now think of Iran, Zoroastrianism has remained part of the cultural heritage of the region. It's remained in festivals from the Avesta, the Zoroastrian Bible, have been incorporated into the biblical, into sort of the classic literature of Persia, and the ways and traditions that began as much as 2,500 years ago have been sort of swallowed and absorbed by the Iranian people. It incorporated deities from the past. I have an odd little spider on my microphone. I was wondering what that was. Because it's both early and a persistent faith tradition, centered at the crossroads of the world, Zoroastrianism thought to have a significant impact on Judaism, Gnosticism, Greek philosophy, Christianity, Baha'ism, and Buddhism. I find myself bouncing between this. It's sort of an religion. It incorporates images of nature and sacred scripture. The hard truth of modern times is that we are really faced with the daunting challenge and wisdom that everything we believed before has been predetermined by so many layers of culture that it's really difficult to separate what the truth is. The modern world is not kind to our religious lives. It has taken a relentless promotion of its own ideas over those of the old ideas. However, the interesting thing about religion is that the moment you can grow frustrated by its all contrived, sort of flawed, historical prophet kind of nature, you have to realize that it holds for us a unique level of a capacity to encourage dignity and courage and gifts. Can you see this little spider? It's amazing. Despite what probably is Zoroastria's false confidence way back in the day that there's a manual we can all agree, in the Azura Mazda of our minds. Mazda, by the way, the car company, was named after Azura Mazda in the way that because it was adopted as a family name of that car company. So essentially, Azura Mazda is sort of incorporated into the Asian car manufacturer we think of today. So we're unfolding in this world of ours. We're unpacking all of these sort of truths. We're unfolding the nature and the layers, and we can't stop doing it. But we have to also look back and take the best of those ideas, right? And the more we understand the layers of who we are as people, the more we understand the longevity of good thoughts in the world, the more we can sort of purify those traditions and step forward and move sort of cleanly and correcting the errors of the past. I think our versions to sort of build beloved community involve an incorporation and a respect for the people of the past, and understanding that all of the ways we've persecuted each other and sort of slighted one another are indignities that really we can't live with anymore. So I offer up just this simple understanding of Zoroastrianism with my spider friend here today, and with the understanding that the greater grasp of all the things we do honors all of the human tradition, past and present. Amen. We're now going to hear from our beloved Leanne, who's going to read our newly brought back, as we start to possibly enter this church, affirmation of gratitude. Someday we will soon be sharing this together, and it won't be too long.
Hopefully very soon. Let us be grateful when we are able to give, for many do not have that privilege. Let us be grateful for all those who share their gifts, for we are enriched by their giving. Let us also be grateful for our needs, so that we may experience the generosity of others. In closing, let us remember this church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all of our differences and beneath all of our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together, in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause in silent witness to that unity.
May the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts, now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. Shalom. Salam. Namaste. Blessed be. And now our service truly begins.